Good governance with good intentions are the hallmark of a government. Implementation with integrity should be the co-passion. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We meet again Monday night at 9:30 p.m. live right here on TV1. Today was quite an eventful day for Sri Lanka, as the first time in the Sri Lankan history it was recorded that a sitting Prime Minister appeared before a Presidential Commission of Inquiry. There were many revelations and the bond has now transformed into a bomb. The Prime Minister, speaking at the Commission of Inquiry when he was questioned, said that he knew the relationship between the former governor's son-in-law, Arjuna Aloysius, who was involved in bond transactions, and if that was the case, why did the Prime Minister appoint the former governor, Arjuna Mahendran, as the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka? John Exter's report, who was the founding governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, very clearly articulates that the governor of the Central Bank should be a man with unquestioned integrity. Tonight, on our show, we discuss about the future of the Commission of Inquiry, what would transpire in the next few days, next few months, and what would be the fate of our dear Prime Minister, the former governor, the ministers who were involved in the bond scam. Tonight on the show, we have invited four eminent personalities to the studios. They are a regular vocalist and have been very vocal on Sri Lanka's biggest bond scam in its history. So let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening is Kirti Tendakone, Executive Director of the Campaign for a Free and Fair Election. Joining us this evening on the show is Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. President's Council, Mr. Hemantha Warakulasira, joins us this evening as well. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Rusiripala Tendakone, who is a senior banker. Let's start off tonight's show with Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Dr. Vijayawardena, something that everyone wanted. They wanted the Prime Minister to appear before the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, testify before the Commission, and tell his side of the story. Were you satisfied with the answers that was given out by the Prime Minister?
Of course, Samir, we'll have to appreciate the fact that Prime Minister has appeared before the Commission and clarified his position to the Commissioners, so that Commissioners can take a note of what he has said and they can make a judgment for themselves. For us to make an evaluation of what the Prime Minister has said, Samir, we don't have information about the transaction that had taken place inside the Bond Commission today. So until we get the detailed transcription of the matters that have been discussed, we are not in a position to say whether we are satisfied or not. But in my view, the Prime Minister's appearance before Commission itself is a positive development.
Dr. Vijayawardena, let me make you cognizant about what transpired with regard to the Monetary Law Act of Sri Lanka. When the Prime Minister was questioned about his authority over deciding on policies taken under the Monetary Law Act, he said that based on the constitution of the country, he can decide on the policy which applies to all institutions under the government. But this is not the case.
Yeah,
we know that very clearly.
That's not the case, Samir, because in 1949, when the Monetary Law Act was enacted by the very same Parliament, the Parliament has given that power to a board called the Monetary Board. And the Monetary Board is the one which would decide on the interest rates and the monetary policy of Sri Lanka. And no government or no cabinet or no minister or no politician or no bureaucrat can intervene in the affairs of the Monetary Board. And of course it's well protected in the Monetary Law Act itself. And that's the way the central banks have been operating throughout the world, not only our Central Bank of Sri Lanka, all the central banks throughout the world enjoy this autonomy. And in terms of the Monetary Law Act, Samir, the provision is that unlike the other public institutions where the minister in charge can issue specific and general directions to the board of directors of those institutions, in the case of the Monetary Law Act, the Minister of Finance or Prime Minister or even the President cannot issue directions to the monetary board, and the monetary board has the full powers to undertake the monetary policy of Sri Lanka. But of course, if there is any difference of opinion between the monetary board and the government in power at that particular point of time, there is a special provision that has been provided for in the Monetary Act, where the Minister of Finance, not the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance can issue a directive in writing to the monetary board indicating that whatever the consequences as a result of that directive would be assumed by the government of the country. So to do that, the Minister of Finance cannot issue that directive alone. He has to get the approval of the cabinet before he does so, because it's a joint responsibility.
In Sri Lankan history, Dr. Wijewardene,
there is only one case in Sri Lanka, because all the ministers of finance had been, even the prime ministers had been complying with this the golden rule that has been enshrined in the Monetary Act. There was only one case in 1959. The Prime Minister Vijayananda Dahanayake, he wanted to win the election that was to take place in 1960. So he issued a directive to the central bank, the monetary board, to reduce the interest rates. But of course he said that he would be taking full responsibility for the direction that he had issued. And of course in the following election, he took the full responsibility and he lost even his seat in Galle.
Dr. W. Wijewardene, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, thank you very much for your thoughts. I now move my attention to Risripala Thendakon, senior banker as well as civil rights activist. Dr. Wijewardene brought in this classic example in 1959 about Mr. Dahanayake losing not only his prime ministerial position but also lost his seat in Galle. Would this be the fate of the UNP government at the next election, given the fact that they have interfered with the Monetary Law Act of Sri Lanka? Your time starts now.
Samir, we know that history repeats. So we hope that history repeats this time in the same manner, because the interference to us who are alert and vigilant about what the government is doing about these monetary policies and how they are trying to interfere, how they are trying to sort of interpret their rights and their authority about the monetary law functioning and about the activities of monetary policy. I mean, it's very, for us, of course, we are estranged by such things, because government should know the limit or the area in which they can interfere into these matters. Unfortunately, as pointed out here by Dr. Wijewardene, the government doesn't, it appears that the government has not taken this note of these regulations and the laws that are enforced. That is why now we see recently in Parliament we heard that the former Minister of Finance virtually accusing the central bank for intervening with the government policy. So he had not been able to differentiate between the relationship between the government policy on financial matters and the government policy what should be on monetary policy. So he has not seen this difference. So these things are happening. So in such a context, we only hope that history is the only one. By repeating itself, if they bring us solace, we will be happy.
Mrs. Thendakon, I heard that you were not allowed to enter today's Commission of Inquiry proceedings. So I'm going to ask you a question about the outside environment, how it appeared, because there was a demonstration that was organized by powerful ministers attached to the UNP. You saw many of them, and there were some notable absentees as well. Sujiva Senasinghe was not present, Ravi Karanayake was not present, and the man who wrote a book about the truth and what transpired on the bond scam, Sujiva Senasinghe, was also not present. Why? Did it surprise you?
Yes, actually the happenings there when we saw was a little I mean unusual and not very pleasant to see, and to see the whole lot of cabinet there. For what purpose? To support whom? To give strength to whom? I mean, this is the thing. Now the whole question again, I like to point out one thing. that the Prime Minister going before the Commission is wrong. It is not the Prime Minister that went there. It is the Minister in charge of the central bank, the function of the central bank, that was summoned. Prime Minister had no role there. It is true that Mr. Wickremesinghe is wearing two hats. That of the Prime Minister, that of the Minister in charge of the central bank. He was summoned before this Commission to question and to get clarifications about his role as the Minister in charge of the central bank. The question of Prime Minister and these, prerogatives and priorities and importance to be adduced to the Prime Minister in questioning should not have arisen in this case.
But you say, Mr. Tennekon, very quickly before I move to Mr. Kiri Tennekon, who's also a Tennekon. Mr. Tennekon, it's quite strange because you say that the Prime Minister was in charge of the Finance Ministry portfolio as well as the central bank, so he has to be questioned. So he wears two hats. Then why was Ravi Karunanayake questioned?
Yeah, because he was brought in there. He was questioned on other things that he performed while remaining as the Minister of Finance. He had played certain roles there. He participated in a discussion, in an extraordinary discussion. He convened a meeting of other ministers and party officials into the central bank premises to discuss about the financial needs of the day. So he has to be questioned.
Based on what Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, said in the Commission of Inquiry, he has solely relied on the Governor of the Central Bank, former Governor of the Central Bank, Arjun Mahendran, as well as his former Finance Minister, Ravi Karunanayake. We'll talk a little bit about that later on in the show. I now move to Mr. Kiri Tennekon, Executive Director of the Campaign for a Free and Fair Election. Mr. Tennekon, earlier yesterday I got a message from you which outlined 24 questions that should be asked from the Prime Minister. How many of these questions was asked by the Attorney General at today's hearings? The time starts now.
Shamil, it's a prestige to be here in this show today with all the eminent bankers and the people who fought for this, getting Mr. Wickremesinghe to the Bond Commission. And it's a when in the big picture, we are very happy people on that part. But here, answering your question, why we drafted these 24 points is that based on the previous sittings of the Bond Commission, we noticed that 13 areas where the answers are due from the Prime Minister as the Minister in charge of the Central Bank. Nothing else, not as the Prime Minister, as very correctly Mr. Rusipal Tennekon said. It is as the Minister in charge of the Central Bank. So we talked about this. We were trying to find answers for some of these questions during the last 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years for that matter. When this particular issue was first raised and officially answered by the Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe in Parliament, 2015 March 17th, he said a different story than what he explained today to the Commission. So that's one thing we surprised. In the other hand, very few questions were raised to the Prime Minister, and I was very much surprised that the amount of information came out from the Minister in charge of the Central Bank is amazing. I feel that during the last sittings of the Commission, we saw that real good homework was done, and the real concerns were addressed by the Aegis Department representatives, but it was not the case which happened today. It was when it comes to that part, it's a bit disappointment. But
why is it disappointing?
I think, I mean, there are more, this Prime Minister's the explanations give more questions than answers today when it comes to the very specific issues, like how and why he earmarked Arjuna Mahendra, and put him in this particular position, which is not a Sri Lankan citizen, which he did not meet the constitutional requirements to hold public office, and continuous information he provided to the parliament which contradicts with the bond commission provided by Minister Ravi Karunanaike, provided by Arjuna Mahendran for that matter. Those specific areas, very technical areas, were not even touched. So in that case, we were very much disappointed with the way the Aegis Department behaved today.
Very quickly, Mr. Nikun, before I move to President's Council, Mr. Hemantha Kulasuriya. So the Prime Minister knew, based on a question that was sent to me by a viewer, so the Prime Minister knew that there was a conflict of interest. If that's the case, even after 2.5 years, why did the Prime Minister appoint Arjuna Mahendran as an advisor?
This is one question we were trying to find answers during last 1.5 years continuously. We might have wrote something like 10 to 12 letters to different people to get an answer. We raised this issue with Ravi Karunanaike, we raised it with the President, and we was not able to get an answer. Still, I think we didn't got a clear answer, and this is one particular question to be get answered by Prime Minister, which did not happen today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kirthanakon. I now move my attention to Mr. Hemantha Kulasuriya, President's Council. Mr. Kulasuriya, I want to ask you a question, taking cue from Mr. Thendakon. He mentioned about not Mr. Livera or De Livera or Mr. Yasantha Kodaguda posed questions from the Prime Minister at the Commission of Inquiry today. It was someone completely outside of this framework. That was the Attorney General himself coming and asking questions from the Prime Minister. Didn't you find this, as a lawyer, as a President's Counsel, a conflict of interest as well?
From here I'm disappointed. I'm sorry to say that all the efforts, the media in this country and others like my friends who are sitting on either side of my chair, what they have done to unearth and to explain to the people, even Mr. Thendakon, about this huge bank robbery, like the great bank robbery of Sri Lanka, has ended in an anticlimax. I believe I'm ashamed that everyone there, even the fact that Mr. Susiripala could not get into the courtroom or to the commission room. There were demonstrations, there were people outside, they were shouting slogans. This reminded me of the day where Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the leader of the opposition, was summoned before another commission. He was summoned before the Batlanda Commission, and we were all strongly supporting him at that event, and we all went to court, and there were a huge crowd that rushed into court and prevented the proceedings also, and he was questioned by Mr. Jamana, the present bribery commissioner, and likewise today, being the Prime Minister, I don't know why, the reason why Mr. Dappul Livera or Mr. Yasantha Kodaguda could not question him.
Mr. Kulasuriya, do you think that if Mr. De Livera or Mr. Kodaguda questioned the Prime Minister today, the tone of the questioning or even the questioning would have been a bit different?
Definitely. You must understand, I don't blame the present Attorney General. He's a very mild-mannered person. He's the person who talks, who questions. I mean, his style is different. And Mr. Jayanta Jayasuriya, when he questioned the Prime Minister, he was very, very courteous to him. And I do not know why there should be that courtesy extended to anybody. He's a witness. And the questions that should follow. Now, for instance, one of the most important questions that were asked, where the Attorney General wanted to ask was, why did the Prime Minister, after appointing Mr. Gamini Pittipan and two others, and appointing a committee or a commission to go into this probe initially, why didn't he follow the recommendations? And one of the things that the Pittipan Commission recommended was that there must be a forensic audit, and so that you can explain, you can find out the digital footprint of the entire transaction. Now, you must understand, Mr. Gamini Pittipan was a member of the UMP Lawyers Association, but we must all respect him, irrespective of, like the others who are now trying to defend the Prime Minister. They were given a job and they tried to do an independent job and file a report. Now the question is, did the Prime Minister ever order a forensic report? And when he just said, yes, I gave it to the Parliament. Now, that's a very strange thing. The next question is, why should he give it to the Parliament?
Thank you very much.
They are not a parliamentary committee. They are appointed by you.
Thank you very
and
much.
you have to follow the instruction. I would have asked, why didn't you?
My next question to you is very quickly. If you were there today questioning the Prime Minister, tell me 5 questions that you would have asked the Prime Minister.
No, because that for me to answer 5 questions, I must study a brief, and I must come very ready. But the question is, from the answer he gave, I gave to the Parliament. Then the question is, why? Why should you give to the Parliament when you appoint a committee and the committee recommends a forensic audit? Why didn't you do that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Varanakul Surya, President's Council. I need to remind our viewers when the bond scam took place on the 28th of February. The second week of March, we told the public that a forensic investigation needs to be conducted into the bond scam that took place on the 27th of February, and that is a must. We have been articulating this position right throughout News First over 2 years, and at least now we are happy that a forensic audit is being taken place, and at least we know the members of the COPE committee who were having dealings with Arjuna Aloysius. Probably they got the information to write the so-called book. So let me open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is Nadeem Majid, on to my immediate left is Nanel Jayawardena, Chaturang Haporachi, and then Faraz Shaukat Ali. Faraz, very quickly tell us what happened at today's Bond Commission. Mr. Tennecoon did not get access, but you had fought your way in, spoke to the Secretary of the Commission of Inquiry, and then got a seat cemented this morning. Tell me.
Well, Shamir, first of all, I must say that it is the right of every bona fide media man or woman to have gained entry. We didn't shout our heads off hoarse for us not to be given entry at the last possible moment. Today was very important because it is the first time ever that a serving Prime Minister of this country has been to any form of a judicial process. And this bond inquiry is a quasi...
What transpired today for us?
Well, today what happened was that the Prime Minister was asked, this is a question that had been asked in his in those questions sent to him, and one was that whether he knew pre-2015, that is in 2014, if Arjuna Aloysius was a director and a shareholder of Perpetual Treasuries Limited. His answer was yes, he knew. The second point then was that he said that he'd asked Arjuna Mahendran to ensure that there was no conflict of interest and to ask his son-in-law to remove himself from that company, the management of that company, and to divest his shareholding. Now, we know that none of these matters, he removed himself from the board of Perpetual Treasuries, but he was the principal shareholder in a company that ultimately owned it. Now, the point here, Shamir, is that the Prime Minister was aware, before he made that appointment, that there was a very clear conflict of interest, and he should not have appointed Mr. Mahendran to that position until such time as the conflict of interest position had been removed. That was one. The other significant part of this was that today the Prime Minister admitted that they had no time to change, to study this change of the system that had been in place from 1997 to 2015, introduced by A.S. Jayawardena, and After 2015, it was the same system. And the Prime Minister admitted that they didn't do a study to look at the pros and cons of it, because he said that they were too busy trying to handle the economy. Well, the one thing he could have done in such an emergency, as he says, was that he could have gone to the cabinet and sought the approval of the cabinet of ministers. He didn't do that either. So it was very clear that all along the Prime Minister was fully aware and cognizant of all aspects of this bond scheme, and that's what transpired today.
Thank you very much, Faraz, for that quick update. I recollect in the first week of April, I too had a call from Arjuna Aloysius when we were covering the bond scam. And when I asked him, what are your comments on the bond scam that took place on the 27th of February, he told me, I am not aware of any bonds, or I am not involved. And 2.5 years later, here you are on the spotlight for carrying out one of the massive frauds in the Sri Lankan history. Chaduranga, over to you. Let's start from your question.
Thank you, Sham. First question to Mr. Tennakon, Kirti Tennakon in this corner. Mr. Tennakon, now everyone is all of a sudden talking about tapping telephone calls and records of telephone calls coming out, and it's an infringement of privacy, so on and so forth. But isn't it, when you look at it this way, none of the ministers or the parliamentarians had to give their phone records to any commission or the CID. It was just one person's mobile phone that was looked into, and that was Mr. Arjuna Aloysius's phone. So in that way, if you look at it, the rumors that are spreading that the government is tapping into people's phones and the privacy being in harm's way, you can't talk about it, right?
Yeah, the issue here, I mean, we saw so much of manipulation coming on with this telephone recordings issue, and it was Arjuna Aloysius' phone which was get the reports of the records of this particular phone, and based on that information, these calculations and information was spread out. It was not phone tapping, or it was not going into the details of the committee members for that matter, or the parliamentarians or the other associated people around him. So I think, I mean, we are not talking about, this commission is not about telephones or the house renting or something. We are specifically talking about a mandate of a commission to find out what happened with the treasury bond and nothing else. So to deviate the attention out of that, some other groups are trying to talk about the telephone tapping and telephone conversations and all that. Even the house renting is, I mean, a very small part of that. Just focus on the ultimate mandated function of the commission. Let's talk about, focus on the treasury bond issue, what is the most disturbing
do you agree with what
Yes, sir. Yeah, those very people who talk about telephone tapping, they know for certainty there was no telephone tapping, there was no recording of the telephones. Why do this? They want to confuse the public. I saw today in Parliament, a point was taken by the leader of the House and informing the Speaker that they want a select committee appointed, or they want some information. Now, what happened actually? What happened in this regard was this: that they got information. They had Arjuna Mahinda's telephone. But understand, the most important telephone was not there. That was destroyed according to Arjuna Aloysius in Singapore.
The child has thrown into the swimming pool.
So now with this telephone, they got all the records. And how did they get that? They made an application to the commissioners. Commissioners gave an order in writing to the CID. Then the CID got the telephone, the service providers, to provide all the information, all the details. That is where all the details came. And some are asking, why not normal Rajapaksa's telephone call? Now that doesn't come within the mandate. of the commission. If they want to.
So are you saying that Nama Rajapaksa also had dealings with Arjun?
No, there some asking.
You just
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying Nama Rajapaksa and various others. Now, for instance, even very important members of the government, they have had telephone calls to Arjun Aloysius. Now, that has nothing to do with the members of the COPE committee. Now, COPE committee has now taken up the position that telephones have been tapped and parliamentary privileges. I don't know how. And not only that, I must tell you that there is an attempt. Yeah. There's an attempt by some members of parliament to have a judicial committee of the parliament and in fact name some of those people, CID officers, and even Mr. Jasanta Goda, the President's Council, who submitted this report as accused. So you can see how the thieves get together. They get together, like 40 thieves, to protect their own interests.
Mr. Tennakoon, a quick question to you now. With what Mr. Wanukulu said, there is no necessity to tap the mobile phones of the UNP COPE members, because we see 23 calls, 2 calls, and 67 calls.
And 657 calls.
I take special notice about this word that you are using constantly, tapping the telephone. Yeah. This is not tapping.
Yeah.
In a murder case, when the murderer has to be traced, they go into evidence that is available. Whether it is a recorded statement, whether it's a book written by somebody, whether it's a letter that is written, whether it's a telephone conversation that is recorded, they go into that. This is a normal thing in evidence. Tapping is another process. Tapping is when you are calling somebody, you use a mechanism or a device to listen to that. Is this the same thing?
No, but I will tell you with responsibility, there was no recording. It's not available. What was available was only what the service providers gave them. Yeah. So it's nothing illegal. What they did was perfectly legal. They got the permission, they got the sanction from the judges, from the commissioners, and got this information.
That's where the manipulation comes. We should be. Everyone knows it in social media. These Ajit P. Pereira's. Conversation pretended to be Ajit P. Pereira's was published, and actually there was no recording as such. So it was the numbers given, how many phone calls were made into and out of Ajit P. Pereira.
That's not a question here, Mr. Tennakoon. Whether Ajit P. Pereira spoke for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, it's not the question. He was a member of the COPE committee. Yeah. If he had dealings with...
that's where the manipulation came.
Member of Mr. Sena Singh told in Parliament, what is wrong? Yeah. What is wrong if I gave a call to Arjun Aloysius? Yeah, if they are friends. No, this is now you understand. They have almost admitted the guilt. They have almost admitted they have spoken to each other.
I think the point we should make there is that 62 out of his 200-odd calls was made during the currency of the COPE sittings. And that's the problem. And he's not addressing that issue. But while we've been talking, Mr. Wanukulu, we have information that out of Zimbabwe, that President Robert Mugabe, his impeachment process will start on Tuesday. Now, do you think that there is such a possibility to impeach our Prime Minister?
I believe, I feel sorry for you and for all other media people who think that something drastic will happen in this Bond Commission. I believe today's episode, the manner in which the Attorney General questioned, and then the directions that were given by someone to question him, all that will show that this is ultimately, there would be nothing. I'm so sorry to say.
Which is why I'm asking you about the question about the impeachment.
Impeachment is something that happened in countries where there is civilized process. Now in Zimbabwe, I don't say so. I don't say so. But what I'm trying to say, impeachment, this is that will never end up in anything. I believe all of us will talk, and ultimately Prime Minister will go on till the end of 2000, the next election, and they will talk and nothing will happen. Sometimes they may find some scapegoat and file some action in the High Court against some few people. That's all.
Dr. Wijewardena, now with what we know from what happened today, it seems like the Prime Minister is putting the ball onto Mr. former Governor Arjuna Mahendran's side and saying, I asked you to remove the son-in-law from the director position. I asked you to do this in good faith, and basically you have not done it, so this is not my fault. That's the our final outcome, what we gather from it. Why is that happening?
No, that's correct, Chaturanga, because the Governor Mahendran would have seen to it that he doesn't have any conflict of interest at the time he was appointed as a governor, and if his son-in-law had been continuing to control the perpetual treasuries as the major shareholder of the perpetual holding company, that itself is a manipulation of the system. So Governor Mahendran would have seen to it that, and so if the responsibility has been given to Governor Mahendran, I will see another aspect to that, because there's a board, monetary board, because it's not the governor who is the head of the central bank. The head of the central bank is the monetary board. If the monetary board has not taken any action, Chaturanga, the whole monetary board is responsible for that.
And even when changing the placement system from the Prime Minister is once again saying, in March we heard him say, I advised the system to be changed because there were malpractices in the previous system. But now again we see the point where the subject minister or the governor cannot take that decision. Once again the monetary board should be taking that decision.
The monetary board. That's why the things have gone wrong, Chaturanga, because the Prime Minister can give any direction. We can't find fault to it. The Prime Minister or any other minister for giving directions to the central bank. But the monetary board should not accede to those directions unless the board agrees to them. Now here what had happened is the monetary board was very silent.
Let me add something. When we saw this, Prime Minister answering these questions, one thing I felt is that the Prime Minister has mixed up with the public finance with the monitoring. Monitoring is a job of the monitoring board, and the public finance might be the case with the parliament. So I think definitely he got messed it up.
Mr. Dr. Wijewardena, I'm just going to ask you, you say that Arjuna Mahendran should have seen to it that his son-in-law should have done whatever, but do you think that even though they lived in the same house, they didn't discuss these matters?
That's the thing.
Like
It's actually, it arouses suspicion from the people, because that he had access to the information which Arjuna Mahendran would have known. His son-in-law would have had access to it, but of course we cannot presume it for us, because we don't know whether they have discussed it or not. And
but of course those the recorded conversations between Aloysius and Kasun Palisena, his CEO, displays an uncanny ability on the part of Mr. Aloysius to predict at what rate the state institutions were going to bid.
Yeah, that of course, for us, I think the information came from people who had been paid out by perpetual treasuries like this, Little Charlie, New Charlie, Little John and all that. All those people had supplied advance information to the perpetual treasuries. And
so who do you think was the biggest Charlie under the law?
We don't know. They have not been named, but of course people have the suspicion about it. But the information had been gathered from variety of sources, not from one source, but from a variety of sources, and they had made use of that information to their best advantage. And that is what the governor would have prevented.
Can I also, adding to all this conversation we've been having about Prime Minister sort of playing this blame game, kind of saying, I told so-and-so to look into this, and, there is a clear conflict of interest there too, as we were just discussing with Arjuna Mahendran and Arjuna Aloysius. But we elected the public elected the Prime Minister. It is true that it goes all back to the monetary board, but doesn't the Prime Minister have some responsibility? Can he just wipe his hands clean easily and say, I've done my bit? Does he not have responsibility to follow through with this? Because he is answerable to us, and the governor of the central bank is not.
No, in terms of the Monetary Act, it's the governor of the central bank who has the responsibility. But of course, when it comes to the overall responsibility of running the country, that is the cabinet headed by the Prime Minister.
But this goes back to that. This whole thing affects...
That's right. So Prime Minister should have seen to it also, because if Governor Mahendran has not taken an action, It's the job of the Prime Minister to see that Mahendran, to deal with Mahendran. So that has not happened.
Can I just come in to clarify one point? I think we are going on a tangent here at this moment, because we keep on talking about this conflict of interest of Aloysius continuing as a director. The factual situation is Arjuna Aloysius was not a director of Perpetual Treasuries, that particular company, when Arjuna Mahendran was appointed. I will give the dates. Arjuna Aloysius resigned from his directorate from Perpetual Treasuries on the 16th of January. Arjuna Mahendran was appointed, his letter was given on the 23rd of January. So let us not confuse these things. I mean, this is a forum where we talk sense and facts. So there is no conflict of interest as far as the appointment was concerned. If the Prime Minister beforehand knew that he was the son-in-law, he was operating a primary dealers company and he was having deals with the central bank, and if he asked Arjuna Mahendran to ask him to resign, well, he has done his job. The Prime Minister. What more do you expect the Prime Minister to do? To go behind Arjuna Mahendran to see whether he has been doing this? If Arjuna Mahendran has not done it, he is at fault.
But is there anyone to monitor Arjuna Mahendran as the governor of Central Bank?
What is happening today is the public officer,
the whole cabinet
officer has missed the bus. He has done the wrong thing. That is why he is expiating.
No, but Mr. Tennecoon, what boils down to the question right now is, it seems that the Prime Minister knew that there was a bond scam that took place on the 27th of February. He's aware of what happened in 2016 April as well.
Yes.
If that is the case, knowing that Governor Arjuna Mahendran was at fault, why did he continue to appoint him as an advisor?
These are very relevant issues. Now,
so why?
These are the questions. These are the questions that should have been asked, and they should have been clarified. Not whether he gave a directive. It is just one part of it. Whether there was a conflict of interest. There are so many other important things that should have come out from the minister in charge of the subject in this context.
Why, Mr.
No, I believe it's very simple. Ranil Wickramasinghe wants Arjuna Mahendran in his office, Ravi Karunanayak in office, so that they will not become state witnesses.
Mr. Tennecoon, now when all of this happened, now you mentioned several dates also.
State witnesses, the whole thing.
Game finished.
Mr. Varakulasuriya, just a very quick
Mr. Hemantha Varakulasuriya came into the right point.
Yes.
I mean, here, today, what I felt, just after this session, of course, there's a possibility that the Arjuna Mahendran might come as the state witness. Because now, what we felt is that the ball is on his court.
Mr. Varakulasuriya,
he can come out and explain what exactly happened.
When you look at the cabinet of ministers and who are surrounding the Prime Minister, all of them are from the same school. So,
I'm also from the same school.
Are you from the same school as well?
Yeah.
If that,
Samir, I'm ashamed.
Also
at
from
Royal
the same
College, we learned something called not done. That is something that you should not never do. If you associate with crooks, then you don't come into that circle. Then you become a crook.
So next time,
if I were the Prime Minister, if I knew that Ravi Karunanayak and Arjuna Mahendran was involved in some kind of thing, do you think I'll keep him? Royal College has taught us to sack them and then get other people to replace them. Why you can't do that? If you are a crook, if I were responsible for all the crookishness, then I'll want to protect him.
So do you regret going to Royal and not?
I don't regret Royal. I regret these people have not learned the basic lesson that was taught to every student at Royal College.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. For Nadim, I need to go for a short commercial break. Dr. Vijayawardena said about Little John. Little John is a character in Robin Hood. What happens in Robin Hood is they take from the rich and give it to the poor. In our case, they take from the poor and fill the pockets of the rich. So we're going for a short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.